Hello, and welcome to Pedigree Radio. I'm your host, Jared Golnitz. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you've had a great weekend. Today we will be going over some of the pedigrees of yesterday's stakes card at Saratoga with George Adams of Housatonic Bloodstock. We'll let him share his story and dig into some of his strategies when he is planning matings. First, though, I would like to tell my story of my new stallion, Aaron's Way. The first time I saw Aaron's Way, I was at a stallion showing at a farm not far from where I live, and in a stall across from the stallion being shown was this very nice horse that had some size to him, but wasn't too big. And I asked the farm owner about him, and she informed me that the horse wasn't being shown, but was simply boarding at her farm for the time being. She informed me who the owner was, and as it turns out, he was owned by someone that I knew somewhat well, but not very well. And I reviewed the horse's page on Equibase, and I liked what I saw, and I called the owner and talked to him about Aaron's Way, and I expressed my interest in sending one or more of my mares to him for breeding. However, the owner had fallen on some difficult times due to an injury and never nominated Aaron's Way for the state breeding incentives. I kept in touch with the owner with this year's breeding season in mind, and seeing that I had a keen interest in the stallion as a breeding prospect, he asked me, would you be interested in buying him? And I wasn't really expecting that, but being a very reputable local horseman, I knew his intentions were pure. And I have talked to many people who have worked with this man, and pretty much everyone had glowing compliments about him. So he came up with a very reasonable offer to buy him, or for me to buy him, for a small cash amount plus some breeding rights for some of his mares that he owned. I talked it over with my wife and the farm where I keep my mares in Maryland, and everyone agreed to adding a stallion to our breeding program. We acquired him in late February, early March, and we didn't get him over to the new farm until about April 1st, so it was already starting to get a little late in the season, and we didn't really get a chance to have him collected and tested for motility and fertility. So this year's breeding season has really been on a wing and a prayer. We haven't heavily marketed Aaron's Way because we didn't know if he was fertile first, and we only had a few mares in the pasture with him. We were trying a new pasture breeding experiment of sorts. And with the farm housing my mares and stallion being close to 45 minutes away, I'm not able to closely supervise the covers, the heat cycles, etc. And the first time we tested the mares, we had the vet out and had them ultrasounded, and both of the mares that we tested had just ovulated, and the tests were inconclusive. And I am a little unnerved that, I wasn't able to keep a close eye on the process, and, it was almost a wasted trip for the vet, so I thought. That was early June, and we were beginning to have some concerns about whether the stallion, A, knew what he was supposed to be doing with the mares, and B, if he was indeed fertile. God forbid that we have another cigar on our hands, or I know in Kentucky there was just recently announced a stallion that had covered 60 mares and only 5 were pregnant. Battle of Midway, I believe was his name. So we had the vet out again this past Friday, and lo and behold, one of my mares, my Sea of Secrets mare named Sweet Sissy Dawn, who is a very sweet mare to humans. She is the type of mare that will lay her head in your lap for some scratches on the ears and on the nose and any little bit of attention she can get. A real sweetheart. On the ultrasound, Sweet Sissy Dawn displayed a developing fetus on the ultrasound, so we were really happy. Sweet Sissy Dawn had a nice colt for us last year by Cal Nation, but she was not bred back due to some mild laceration. All of the farm staff were there and were very excited, and of course I was over the moon, knowing that it wasn't a complete bust for us. So, who is Aaron's Way? Well, Aaron's Way was an exciting, precocious sprinter in Charlestown in 2010 and 2011, and then he took a year off and then came back for a brief 2013 campaign. He was owned and bred by Wade Sanderson, and he started his juvenile season with a maiden special win, and followed that with a win in the Henry Mercer Memorial Stakes for 2-year-olds. And that was going 4.5 furlongs. And then going into his 3-year-old campaign, he continued his undefeated streak with an allowance win and 2 more stakes wins in the Coin Collector and in the Robert G. Levitt. So he was good from 4.5 and all the way out to 7 furlongs as a sprinter, stakes wins. And after that, he finally got a second in an allowance race, and altogether, he only finished off the board once in his 11 career starts. So I felt he had displayed enough of the pure speed and class necessary to be considered a viable stallion prospect, at least for a backyard program like mine, and maybe even regionally for Maryland and West Virginia and the rest of the Mid-Atlantic. So, when I've told people about him here locally, many people remember his name. They said, "Oh, was that Wade Sanderson's horse?" And I just say yes. And I'm glad that people remember him. And I will be heavily marketing him for 2019 in the Mid-Atlantic region. And you can find out more about Aaron's Way at www.aaronswaystallion.com. And so let's go over to the Saratoga races. And we will start out with Sister Charlie. And Sister Charlie is an Irish bred by the stallion My Boy Charlie, and out of the Galileo mare, Starlet's sister. So there's a lot of Rasmussen factor, and just to remind to those of you who aren't familiar with the term Rasmussen factor is the idea that you can inbreed to superior female ancestors to try to get a speedy foal. Again, these are all theories. There's no right answer or wrong answer, but in this particular instance, there's on top and bottom a duplication of Leiloon, who is a daughter of Jeddah, who is one of my favorites. Leiloon was by Jeddah and out of a Abimelech mare. Also duplicated is the great Thong, who is a good blue hen. On both the top and the bottom. And those are on the interior of the pedigree. And this leads me to another cross that I became a little curious about as to what might a daughter of Street Cry look like with distorted humor. And so I looked to see if there were any out there, and I only found one so far. And that was it's a juvenile filly named Offering, who is by Distorted Humor out of a Street Cry mare. And the reason for that is that Street Cry carries Riverman, who is by Never Bend and out of a Prince John mare. And being a son of Never Bend, Riverman also carries Leiloon and Jeddah and Abimelech. And this, would go very well with Distorted Humor's Mr. Leader that he has in his tail line. which also has Jeddah. Now, to remind, Distorted Humor has no La Troyenne in his blood, but he has gotten 35%, approximately 35% stakes winners from mares carrying La Troyenne, at least during the first 8 years he was evaluated and studied. So, I have no reason to suspect that would really that trend would let up any. And so I would really like to see that. But anyway, Sister Charlie has Riverman and also has Nazrilla, lots of War Admiral. The dam is inbred to Miswaki by Mr. Prospector out of the Buck Passer mare Hope Springs Eternal, and we always like to see any combination of Buck Passer in the pedigrees. Certainly the doubling of the female ancestors Leiloon and Thong are certainly always welcome. And so yeah, I like that pedigree a lot. There's some Irish mare female lines in here that I'm not quite familiar with, but it looks like there's a lot of Blenheim used in the female line, a double of Nazrula, a sex switch of Man o' War, and that trend continues also throughout with Green Dancer. So Green Dancer has several female strains of Man o' War, and all that balances out War Admiral, who's a male strain of Man o' War, really well. So, all right, let's see what else we got here. I wanted to go back and cover the Indiana Derby in the Indiana Oaks. So we're going to go back and look at that. It looks like the winner of that was a horse named Axelrod. So let's go back and look at Axelrod real quick. And Axelrod is a son of Warrior's Reward, who was a son of Medaglia d'Oro. And Seeking the Gold is the dam sire of Warrior's Reward. Seeking the Gold is also a son of Mr. Prospector out of a Buck Passer mare. And we just saw that with Miswaki. So there's a clear nick there between Mr. Prospector and Buck Passer that we would be well to pay close attention to. Axelrod also has a double of Sir Ivor, top and bottom. Sir Ivor was a son of Sir Gaylord. And Warrior's Reward also has Seattle Dancer, who is the Nijinsky half-brother to Seattle Slew. So, if Axelrod goes to stud, I would love to see any lines of Seattle Slew. There are Northern Dancer, there's Sadler's Wells, there's El Gran Senor, who is also out of a Buck Passer mare named Sex Appeal. And there's also Hero's Honor. So I think a great setup here would be for a daughter of Stormy Atlantic who carries Stormbird, who's the genetic equivalent of Nijinsky, and also carries Seattle Slew through a daughter of Seattle Slew. So I think that would be great to see here for Axelrod when he goes to stud. And now we'll take a look at the Kentucky Oaks winners. Not the Kentucky Oaks, but the Indiana Oaks. We'll get to the Kentucky Oaks winner later. She just showed up again in the in the Coaching Club America Oaks, being Monomoy Girl. So let's look at the Indiana Oaks winner. Her name is Talk Vuv to me, or Talk Vuv to me. I'm not sure exactly how you say that, but anyway, also by Violence, who's also a son of Medaglia d'Oro, the the Indiana Derby winner was also by a son of Medaglia d'Oro. And so Talk Vuv to me is by Violence, and out of the Point Given mare Biblical Point. And so there are doubles of Mr. Prospector, doubles of Stormbird, and doubles of Blushing Groom. This looks a little bit like the recipe that created Gunrunner, except there's no leaf art in this pedigree that I can see. One thing I forgot to mention about the Axelrod pedigree was that there was also a double of Damascus. And I haven't talked a lot about Damascus, but he is a Damascus is a male line descendant of Son Again. And Son Again was a grandson of Teddy, who also carried Stimulus, who was by Ultimus. And we've discussed Ultimus, so, Ultimus was very highly inbred to Domino. And his son Stimulus also carried more Alarm, who was the grandsire of Domino. But one other thing Damascus carries is My Babu, who is a grandson of Turbalon. He also carries a set of genetic equivalents. There's the dam sire of Sword Dancer, who is the sire of Damascus, is named Bijimini. And Bijimini is the result of Pharamond over a blue larkspur mare. At the bottom of the pedigree of Damascus, his second dam's name is Blade of Time. Blade of Time was by Pharamond's full brother, Sickle, and also out of a blue larkspur mare named Bar Nothing, who is out of the mare Beaming Beauty. Now, Beaming Beauty was also highly inbred to Domino, much like Ultimus was. It was a 3 to 4 to 4 of Domino. So Hippodrome, like Ultimus, was 2 to 2 to Domino. So if you can combine Beaming Beauty and Ultimus, you're getting a lot of Domino and a lot of pure classic speed in the blood. And so that's just something to consider. So if you give me a second here. All right, and I think we're ready to bring on our guest, Mr. George Adams of Housatonic Bloodstock. George, can you hear me?
I can, Jared. Hi.
Great, thank you for joining us. So,
thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you. So, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about your story, and I think yours is a very interesting story about your interest in horses and what you did to be able to get into the thoroughbred industry professionally. So if you could just kind of start at the beginning of how you got into horse racing.
Yeah, I grew up in western Massachusetts, about an hour and a half from Saratoga. Had no family connection to racing. Nobody we knew had anything to do with racing, but for some reason, from the time I was a little kid, it was what I always wanted to do. The best anyone can figure is the Black Stallion books made in impression. So for my 11th birthday, I convinced my parents to take me to Saratoga, which was 1993, and we were there the day that Furiously won the Bernard Baruch, and I had that racing form from that day for ever until about 5 years ago. My parents made me finally clean out all of my old racing stuff from their basement. So yeah, we used to go to Saratoga every summer. I got all of the sales catalogs from Keeneland and Fasig-Tipton, read them cover to cover, the Stallion Register. Back then, there was a program on TV called the Racehorse Digest on ESPN once a week. I had untold VHS tapes that had every episode of that taped, and I wouldn't tape over them. Those I actually still have in my basement now. Just was a fan for sort of a very long time. Again, because I had no connection. Until I was in college, I had a summer job driving a produce delivery truck, which meant I had to get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get to work, but also meant I was done by about 2 o'clock. So I used to drive over to Saratoga after I got done to catch the feature every day, which was a long way to go. But that was, what I wanted to do. And one day that summer on my day off, I decided to get up early and go over and watch workouts. And I happened to stand at the rail next to Seth and Del Hancock and Buzzy Tenney, who was Shug McGaughey's assistant at the time, and shaking like a leaf because I was so nervous. Went up and introduced myself to them and explained that I was a huge fan of their horses. And Buzzy was nice enough to invite me back to the barn at Saratoga later that afternoon when they would graze the horses in the afternoon during the races. So I did that, and the rest of the summer, every time I went to Saratoga, I just went back to the barn and hung out and watched the horses and took pictures. In the end of the summer, I asked Buzzy if the following summer I could come work for them, and he said yes. So the next summer, my parents dropped me off at Belmont when school ended, and I lived in a tack room there at Belmont for the first half of the summer, and then rode in the horse trailer up to Saratoga when that meet started, and walked huts at Saratoga for the second half of the summer. And just, that was all I did. I didn't have a car. Cell phones were sort of very early on. The internet wasn't really around yet. So I was there in the barn, living at the track, in the Phipps barn.
Yeah, but that was still
pretty amazing.
That was still you living the dream, though, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I did. It was not. That was not me complaining. That was great. I couldn't have asked for anything more. That was the year that Stormfly Flying was a 3-year-old. We had Congrats in the barn. He ran in the Travers that summer. And the filly that I hot walked every day was a filly named Daydreaming, who broke her maiden at Saratoga first time out. I got to be in the winner's circle floater there, and then she ran back on the spinaway at the end of the meet. And I have the saddle towel still hanging in my house from that race. And of course, she's now the dam of a Grade 1 winner named Imagining, who's at stud here in Maryland. And I've got a couple mares in foal to him for next year, which kind of a nice, worked out nicely there. But after that summer was in the Phipps barn for Shug, I still had another year of school. Went back, finished college, was an English major, had nothing to do with horses, and figured I would go to law school because that's sort of, I was good at school, and everybody said, well, you can always do the horse thing later. You should, go get a good paying job and maybe buy some someday, which made sense at the time. Not that I didn't love that summer, but walking hots is not the most lucrative business proposition. So I finished school, and knowing that I was going to go to law school, eventually took a year in between and went and worked at Claiborne in Kentucky. Helped prep sales yearlings for a few months, worked the September sale for the Claiborne consignment, which was really cool. And then actually groomed stallions for the last few months I was there. So I had Danzig, Devil's Bag, and Boundary were my 3 that I had every day. Danzig and Devil's Bag were pensioned by then. and Boundary hadn't yet sired Big Brown. So I was not, I didn't have the cream of the Claiborne crop to groom, but I was still, working at Claiborne, grooming stallions, giving the tour to breeders or tourists who showed up, which again, living the dream. Did that, like I said, the year between college and law school. I went to law school, went to law school in Boston, practiced as a lawyer for a few years, hated every minute of it, and eventually got to the point where I said, you know what, I'm gonna try to make this horse thing work as an actual job. So Josh Pons at Country Life was nice enough to respond to a letter I sent, telling him my story and asking for a job, and I came down to Country Life 6 or 7 years ago now. Did a little bit of everything for them, helped redesign their website, used to put out a newsletter once a month, did stallion contracts, sold nominations. They do a lot of racing partnerships, breeding partnerships. I used to do a lot of the partner communication, and helped picked out horses at the sales to be in those partnerships. Did that for 3 years or so, and finally got to the point where I said, I'm ready to go out and do this for myself. And about 3 years ago now, started my bloodstock business, and we're rolling.
Yeah,
We do a lot of pedigree research for folks who have mares, mating recommendations, and help them, pick out mares at the sales. Done some yearling and 2-year-old purchases also.
Great. So
a little bit of everything.
So how looking back, how educational and how much did you get out of your time at both Claiborne and at Country Life Farm? Do you feel like it truly prepared you for going out on your own?
Well, I mean, it's, you learn. I mean, nothing prepares you for going out on your own, I don't think. The pressure that comes with, being your own boss sounds great in theory, until you're also responsible for making all the decisions, whether they turn out well or not, and when you're responsible for generating your income. But, Claiborne has been around and at the top of the industry from the beginning almost. So that was just an incredible place to be, and working with the horses of the caliber that they had there. The yearlings, the summer I was there, we sold a $1 million Danzig yearling to Coolmore. I had a $700,000 deputy minister filly who ended up being a stakes horse. There was an Arch filly who was the horse of the year in Canada, Aravale, that was in the consignment that summer. It's just, having experience with those types of horses is priceless. And the connections that came with it. I still see Del Hancock at the sales or at the races at the Saratoga, and always says hi. Bernie Sams is the stallion guy down there at Claiborne. Now I've called him to book mares, which is another sort of full circle thing that's pretty exciting. Country Life again, they're sort of the Maryland equivalent of Claiborne. They've been around forever, and they started Malibu Moon here. They had Allen's Prospect and some other really nice stallions back in the day, that weren't just regional stallions. With the Maryland program on the upswing, like it has been the last few years, it was an exciting time to be there. They were adding new stallions every year while I was there. It's a different, I got to see a different side, or many different sides of the business than what I saw while I was at Claiborne. I wasn't in the office at Claiborne. I was out with the horses. At Country Life, I was in the office, seeing what goes on that side of things. So they were both fantastic experiences, and priceless, really.
Yeah, and it looks like Christy Holden has done a good job of picking up the torch and continuing to carry it on. I get the newsletter from her, and
she was there long before I was.
Yeah, well, I'm saying she's
been there a long time.
Yeah, she's doing some of the work that you started, though. Some of the things that you put in place there, she has kept going with to kind of continue the outreach with Country Life's clients.
Yeah. As far as I know, that's true.
Yep. So, you mentioned deputy minister. Can you give our listeners an idea of your experiences with dealing with deputy minister in terms of his potency and breeding? I noticed a lot of his daughters have produced a lot of top horses. What have been your observations with deputy minister?
Well, I think the most striking one right now is also his son Awesome Again is still one of the best stallions in Kentucky, if underrated and undervalued. And then Ghost Sapper, is the broodmare sire of a Triple Crown winner with only a relatively small number of daughters of age as broodmares so far. And obviously Deputy Minister has a huge influence on both of those horses. Deputy Minister was not around. I never saw the horse myself in person, but he was obviously a huge influence for precocity and class on both sides of the pedigree. And it is Awesome Again and Ghost Zapper are both also on both sides of the pedigree. A horse like Touch Gold, who won the Belmont, probably should have won the Preakness his year. Maybe wasn't quite the stallion that Awesome Again was, but is also pretty nice to see on a broodmare sire line.
Great. So I wanted to ask you about something. I went to your website, which is, for those who don't know, it is www.housatonicbloodstock.com. That is HOUSATONIC bloodstock.com. And as I was reading your blog, I noticed that one of your big things that you look for are matches between the female line and the sire line.
Mm-hmm.
How much weight do you give that, and how much have you seen that kind of hold true in your analysis?
Well, I think it's. I said that to me that's the most important part. You had mentioned before we came on tonight, you wanted to talk about Got Stormy,
Mm-hmm.
and she's actually a really nice example of that. She's out of a mare named Super Phoebe, who's by Malabar Gold, which is an unbridled son. But Super Phoebe is out of a mare named Air France, a French deputy mare, actually, talking about deputy minister. I didn't mention French deputy is one of his sons, but he was a pretty good racehorse too, and top sire in Japan now, and another that you really like to see on the broodmare sire line. But anyway, Air France, the second dam of Got Stormy, produced two graded stakes winners herself. One of them, Smooth Air, a $1 million earner by a horse named Smooth Jazz, who's by Storm Boot by Stormcat. And her other graded stakes winner was Overdriven by Tail of the Cat, another son of Stormcat. So that's two graded stakes winners by two Stormcat line stallions. I mentioned Air France's daughter, Super Phoebe, who's by an unbridled son. But when she was mated to Get Stormy, who's a grandson of Stormcat, she produced Got Stormy, who's now, I think, won three or four graded stakes after her win yesterday up at Woodbine.
Great.
So that right there, to me, that's if I had a mare from a daughter of Air France or a granddaughter of Air France, that'd be the first thing I would look to do is if she didn't have any Stormcat in the mare's own top line, I'd be looking at sons and grandsons predominantly now of Stormcat. There are a couple of sons left, but grandsons of Stormcat to try and breed her to duplicate what's obviously worked for that family already.
Right. It'd be nice to see if any of the major nicking services would be able to do a female line over male line nick, and not just a sire line over broodmare sire line nick. Based on your.
Well, I think the problem, the reason that things like that don't work is typically there's not enough of a sample size.
Right.
You couldn't get a rating because there's just not. Mares only have so many foals over the course of their lives. That's why they default to the sire line nicks to give the rating
for a larger sample size. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it'd be great if there was a way to do that. But that's where that's why you hire a bloodstock agent to look at your mare's female family and notice these things and point them out to you.
Exactly. So how much weight do you give to like the interior of the pedigree? Say the sire of a mare and then the mother of the stallion. How much weight do you give to the interior of the pedigree there when you're looking for inbreeding and things like that?
I don't know that any. For me, no position is really more important than another. You know, when we talk about these things, we tend to sort of default to sire lines. You know, I mean, I just did it a minute ago talking about Air France and Super Phoebe and how they both have had success mated to Stormcat line sires. You know, if you had a stallion out of a Stormcat mare, you know, it was like Speightstown, was out of a Stormcat mare. You know, there's no reason that influence is going to be any sort of less potent when crossed with a mare like that.
Okay.
You know, I don't have studies, and I would probably default to you know, finding a sire line representative, but you know, you have to take other things into account also. You know, the build of the mare, the build of the stallion, what the mare did on the track, what you're trying to breed for. You know, you take all those things into consideration, and you know, if the client came to me and said, you know, I really don't like Stormcat stallions for whatever reason, the typical knocks on Stormcat, you know, were bad knees and bad winds, or that, you know, I don't want to breed to a Stormcat line stallion for those reasons. So, well, how about Speightstown, or how about Speightster or Munnings, you know, sons of Speightstown, something like that, just to, you know, and you still get that Stormcat blood, and you know, because it's clearly worked. And even if you've tried it with a Stormcat stallion and it hasn't worked as well for this mare, you might say, well, let's go a slightly different route, and you know, we'll get that blood in there a different way and go with a stallion from another line. Or maybe there isn't a Stormcat stallion that falls in your price range, or you know, you want to breed at a certain farm because you have a relationship there, so they don't have a Stormcat line stallion, but they have one that's out of a mare by a son of Stormcat, something like that. You know, there's different considerations for every mare, every client, depending on, you know, their budget and their goals and their mares.
Great. Okay, let's George, let's switch gears if we could to the Saratoga races, and
sure.
So let's start with Sambaye, the winner of the Grade 3 Stanford Stakes. He is by Into Mischief out of the Limehouse mare Tarota. What do you like about this mating?
Well, Into Mischief can't really do anything wrong right now.
No, he can't.
You know, he had Sombaye, he had Instagrand, who's a TDN Rising Star out at Low Sale for Jerry Hollandover a couple of weeks ago. They had another Into Mischief winner, Roayton, yesterday or the day before, out of Delmar. I mean, this horse, he's done at Spendthrift. He was one of their first Share the Upside stallions. I think only a dozen people actually participated in that program with him. And his crop of 3-year-olds this year, I think, is bigger than his first 4 crops combined, I believe is what they've said. So he started really hot with maybe lower quality mares and not very many of them,
right, and
has now continued it with these bigger books. So that's the first thing that jumps out at me about Sombaye is the Into Mischief there on top.
And Golden Sense is off to a pretty good start too, isn't he? He's getting his first runners.
Yeah, and he had the 4th place finisher in the Sanford Bagno Solo is from the first crop of Golden Sense. And actually, so Sombaye is by Into Mischief out of a Limehouse mare. Limehouse is by Grand Slam, who's a son of Gone West. Bagno Solo is out of an Unbridled Song mare, who's out of an Elusive Quality mare. And Elusive Quality is also a son of Gone West, so there's some similarities in those pedigrees. But Sombaye, Instagrand, Rowayton, the three really nice Into Mischiefs that 2-year-olds that have won recently. Their female families are sort of, you can't get much different, which is a really interesting thing about Into Mischief. He doesn't need a certain mare with a certain pedigree, which isn't to say there aren't nicks out there. But Sombaye is out of a Limehouse mare, and that mare has, or Limehouse actually has 2 crosses of Mr. Prospector in his pedigree, but otherwise that's an outcross through 5 generations. Instagrand is a complete outcross through 5 generations, and Rowayton is a complete outcross through 5 generations.
Yeah, and that's kind of strange.
Instagrand is out of a yep.
I was gonna say it's kind of strange because well, being a local here in West Virginia, I go over to the O'Sullivan Farm Stallion Show every year where Limehouse is prominently displayed
sure.
and touted, rightfully so. But one of the things that they tout is that he always loves more Mr. Prospector, and this seems to kind of fly in the face of that, because there's, there isn't any other Mr. Prospector to be found in the pedigree except for Limehouse himself. So this is kind of one of those exceptions.
This one.
Yeah. This is one of those
Yeah,
exceptions.
and I know of Limehouse, and he's one of the top stallions in West Virginia. I have not studied him closely enough to know what works, but generally speaking, it's hard to get too much Mr. Prospector, too much Northern Dancer, which is a good thing because there's so much of it out there in the mare population. It's hard to avoid. But Tappet already has more than a handful of graded stakes winners with at least like 4 crosses of Mr. Prospector in the first 4 and 5 generations of the pedigrees, which some people used to shy away from that much inbreeding, especially to a horse like Mr. Prospector, who
right.
Had some detractors physically. Nobody can really knock what you did as a stallion, but much like Stormcat passed along some qualities that people wouldn't necessarily want to duplicate. Mr. Prospector could do the same thing.
Okay.
But it doesn't seem to be hurting Tappet.
Oh, absolutely not. So one of the things that I've noticed about this pedigree, when I blow it out to 6 generations, is there's a nice 6x6 to Flower Bowl, who's from the female line of Boudoir II. And I think it's very interesting to note that, Mandy Pope's...
Sex balanced, too.
Yep, sex balanced, yep, through His Majesty and Bull of Flowers. And both are very close to Nijinsky. So, Whiskey Road was by Nijinsky out of A Daughter of Flower Bowl. And Battle Creek Girl, who is the dam of Tricky Creek, who is the dam sire of Into Mischief, is kind of on a reverse cross of by a son of Flower Bowl, His Majesty, and out of a Nijinsky mare, Far Beyond. And, I talked a lot to, Alan Porter and Byron Rogers about the importance of getting, stacking those similarly bred horses to get a similar genetic type in both parents. And, I love the lines of Boudoir. My mare that I have, Sweet Sissy Dawn, she's from that direct female line. Very interesting that Mandy Pope has spent a good deal of money on both Groupie Doll and more recently Songbird, who are both from that female line of Boudoir II, both through Flower Bowl's full sister Floral Park. And so it's one that I love to just kind of see doubled whenever possible. It's a little bit more challenging to get a double of that. Not terribly impossible, but it's not like saying doubling, Latroin or Natalma. Those aren't so challenging anymore. But getting that double of Boudoir is a little more challenging. But it's still one that seems to work a lot. Yeah.
And if Quality Road keeps going the way he is, and he's out of a Strawberry Road mare, so you get a lot more Whiskey Road Bowl of Flowers that way. You'd still have to find it in the stallion that you'd made a Quality Road mare to, or have it in a mare that you're going to breed to a son of Quality Road. But that's all it takes sometimes is one horse with a line like that to to succeed, and then it opens up all kinds of possibilities for the inbreeding like you're talking about.
Right. Great. Okay, let's move on to Schuylerville winner Catherine the Great, who is by Uncaptured, out of the Carson City Mare Classy City Lady. The only thing that really shows as far as the inbreeding here, at least in the 5 generations, is a 3 to 5 of Mr. P.
Yes. Although what I thought was interesting about Catherine the Great, and thinking about Sombaye too, Uncaptured is by Lionheart, who's a grandson of Stormcat, and Lionheart is out of a Mr. Leader mare, Satin Sunrise, and Mr. Leader is by Hail to Reason.
Right.
And that's similar to Into Mischief, who's by Harlan's Holiday, who's a son of Harlan, who's a son of Stormcat out of a Halo mare. So there's Hail to Reason there, and then Into Mischief also has Hail to Reason as the sire of his second dam sire.
Yep.
So it's
second
Stormcat with Hail to Reason seems to be a nice thing to have in a pedigree. And Uncaptured has another cross of Hail to Reason because he's out of an Arch mare, and Arch is by Chris S. He's by Roberto, who's Hail to Reason.
Right. Now, one thing I see about
Uncaptured
is I'm sorry. So one thing that jumps out at me is that this is a perfect example of what you might call hybrid vigor. So you have in Uncaptured, you have that double of Hail to Reason, in addition to a double of Northern Dancer, but setting that aside for a second, and Raise the Native, but setting that aside, so you one of the two of the horses that are very closely related to each other when you do a hypothetical mating on them are Buck Passer and Hail to Reason. And so the second dam is actually inbred to Buck Passer, Classy Place. And, there's no more Buck Passer there, but when you get up to the top, you get the, Uncaptured is inbred to Hail to Reason. So you're doing an outcross, but to similarly related horses. And how often do you see that? I think it was maybe Red Ransom that had that as well going on with him, or a very similar setup, maybe not with the exact same players, but where you get kind of an outcross, but to very to genetic equivalents on both sides.
Sure. Well, that's you touched on that earlier, talking about your conversations with Alan Porter and Byron Rogers, and that's it's a way to just pile up the right kind of genes, the kind of genes you're looking for, with those genetically similar names in the pedigree. You like to go a little deeper, a little further back in the pedigrees than I do.
My
not that I don't look further back, but
my preference is to go closer up if I can. But if I'm
sure.
having to kind of create something out of nothing, I'll go further back to find that something.
Oh, sure.
My preference is closer up.
Oh, no,
if possible.
That's the way to do it. And I listened to that conversation you had with Alan Porter a few weeks ago, and thought he made some really interesting points that, with sort of, I remember if he used the phrase cheaper mares, but that was sort of the gist. And, you might inbreed more closely with, lesser quality mares, or mares from, that don't have quite as much family, up close to try and inject some speed. And I thought that was actually a really interesting point that he had made.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to our last one here, and then and that would be Sister Charlie, who's an Irish bred by my boy Charlie, out of the Galileo mare, Starlet's Sister. What jumps out at you here?
Yeah, and that's a reverse of the a reverse of the cross that has worked incredibly well over in Ireland for Galileo. Galileo over Danehill has been an incredible cross. Frankel is the sort of big one. So this is the reverse of that. My boy Charlie is by Dane time, who's by Danehill, and of course Sister Charlie is out of a Galileo mare, as you mentioned. So that jumps out at me. That the dam is inbred to Milwaukee, which is interesting. He was the son of Mr. Prospector out of a Buckpasser mare, which is sort of North American dirt performance, but he's been a huge influence in Europe, and not just through Urban C, who's the dam of course of Galileo, and See the Stars, who had another classic winner over in Ireland yesterday. But yeah, that's interesting to have the Milwaukee there on the bottom.
Yeah, and
twice.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of another example of hybrid vigor. So when I look at the pedigree of My Boy Charlie, there's there's a double of Rough Shot up there. So actually you're getting, and I didn't realize this until I got the 6th generation on My Boy Charlie. So you're actually getting three lines of Rough Shot through, Sex Balance through Lieutenant Stevens and through, his full sister Thong and Lieutenant Stevens. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely there. And you were talking a minute ago about Buckpasser, and there's two Milwaukee's out of a Buckpasser mare. Milwaukee showed up twice in the dam of Sister Charlie, and then Danehill is out of a mare Raziana, whose dam Spring Adieu is a Buckpasser mare.
Right.
So that's another line of Buckpasser there on the top.
Great. Yeah. And let me go back to my Sister Charlie here. And
well, you were talking a minute ago about Lieutenant Stevens and Thong, and of course Galileo is by Sadler's Wells, who's out of Ferry Bridge, who's out of Special, and she's from that family also.
Right.
So you're getting, again, you've got it on top, and now you're getting it on the bottom.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, did King Mambo have some of that going on as well? I think as far as having the Special in there. So Nureyev was also a son of Special.
Sure. Yeah. And, he's very closely related to Sadler's Wells.
Yeah. So that's where. I was pretty sure I'd seen that blood in King Mambo before, and how important is just memorizing the pedigrees of a lot of these, even the further back ancestors, when you're jogging through all the stallions in Kentucky.
I think it's pretty huge.
Yeah. And
it's pretty important. You say looking at a stallion, it's nice to know where certain traits may have come from, so you know what you might want to try and double up on or avoid, as the case may be. Nicks aren't the be all end all, but there's certainly something to nicks, so it's important to know what works and why it might work. I think reading the stallion register and reading the sales catalogs is definitely useful if bloodstock is something that you're interested in.
Right.
Obviously the physical horse matters, but you're choosing between two well-made horses, and one has a nice pedigree and one has a pedigree with some holes in it. One of them probably going to be more expensive, but probably also has a better chance of being worth the price.
Yeah, and I was telling the listeners about my stallion acquisition. That we just had our first mare check in full, but I was talking to you.
Congratulations!
Thank you. And I was talking to you, a few months ago about getting him into the Maryland breeding program, and I didn't even know at the time whether it was worth nominating him for the Maryland Million, and I just want our listeners to know that this is the point at where George reminded me about one of the universal truths of horse racing, and your words were, of course he has a chance. This is horse racing. And you were alluding to the fact that, the greatness can come from anywhere, in any given day,
Absolutely.
Out of any two horses. So, I just want to thank George
look at Sombaye and Catherine the Great.
Yeah.
Sombaye is by a stallion that stands for $100,000 now into mischief, and Catherine the Great's by a $6,000 stallion in Florida.
Right.
And they both won the equivalent graded stakes races at Saratoga.
Right.
Two very different profiles right now, and they both got to the same place. So.
Right. And, I got the notification about Monomoy Girl winning the Coaching Club America Oaks, but I've already covered her in depth on this show in previous episodes, so I'm going to spare the listeners the redundancy on that. But, George, I just want to say thank you for coming on.
The only thing I wanted to... Oh.
Go ahead.
I just want to point out, Monomoy Girl I thought was interesting because she's inbred to Seattle Slew 5x4, and we started off talking about Got Stormy, who is 4x5 to Seattle Slew. Inbreeding to Seattle Slew is sort of not as prevalent or as successful as inbreeding to Mr. Prospector and Northern Dancer. So I thought it was interesting that those two, that pair of 3-year-old fillies that we were going to talk about today, both had that inbreeding there.
Seattle Slew, yeah. And one thing that our listeners should keep in mind is that Seattle Slew and Mr. Prospector both come from the same female line. So they both are tail female to Frizette. So Myrtlewood, yeah. So keep that in mind. When considering, if you have a mare that's maybe inbred to Mr. Prospector, see if you can get her to a stallion. I don't know if there are any right now that's maybe inbred to Seattle Slew, and you get that nice quadruple of Myrtlewood, who is, proven herself over and over again as a blue hen, to be.
And that might explain some of why AP Indy Mr. Prospector was such a prepotent nick.
Absolutely. Pulpit.
And why those sons, the stallions bred on those crosses, have done so well too. Yeah, Pulpit, Mineshaft, Flatter, Congrats are all
absolutely all
that same nick.
Great. Well, George, I want to say thank you for coming on. Our hour's about up here, so if you could just let our listeners know how to get a hold of you if they want to have you do some analysis for their mares.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, Jared. You can email Housatonic Bloodstock at gmail.com. HOUSATONIC bloodstock.com or at gmail.com. The website is Housatonicbloodstock.com. We're on Twitter at GWA4TH, and Housatonic Bloodstock is on Facebook also, so you can like that page and follow us on there.
Great. Sounds good, George. Thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you. All right, everyone. That was George Adams of Housatonic Bloodstock. Well, that wraps up our episode for today, and hopefully we can have more coverage of Saratoga for you next week. And just want to say thanks again to George for a great show, and we'll see you next week. This is Jared Golnitz for Pedigree Radio. Have a great weekend. Thank you.